Diplomatic tension appears to be escalating between Prime Minister Mark Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump. Trump has just uninvited Carney from his so-called Board of Peace. The president posting about it on social media last night. His withdrawal following Carney's second major speech this week, in which he rebuked Trump's veiled threats against Canada at the World Economic Forum. Carney spoke yesterday at the Liberal cabinet retreat in Quebec City.
Canada and the United States have built a remarkable partnership in the economy, in security, and in rich cultural exchange. But Canada doesn't live because of the United States. Canada thrives because we are Canadian.
All right, to dig deeper into this, we've reached Scott Lucas. He's a professor of international politics at University College Dublin, joining us from Wicklow, Ireland. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you.
A lot to talk about here with this late-breaking news last night that Trump was going to withdraw his invitation to Carney to join the Board of Peace. What do you make of this move?
So let me get this straight. Mark Carney had already said, or Canada had already said, they weren't going to come to Trump's party anyway. They were washing their hair. They had better things to do than go to effectively a symbolic event called the Board of Peace, which is more about Trump's ego than it's actually about peace. And then Trump decides, oh, I'm going to be the one that set the news agenda by saying, oh, I don't want you here anyway. I don't want you in my party. I mean, that's effectively what happened. I don't want to be too flippant about this. I think there are serious issues to discuss here, given what has happened at Davos this week, given the turmoil inside Washington domestically as well as their foreign policy, and given the very important speech that Mark Carney made yesterday about Canadian identity and Canadian values. But Trump here is just simply throwing a tantrum because, number one, he was upstaged at Davos by Mark Carney's speech. Number two, because he had to bail out of trying to seize Greenland, in part because of the unified front of Canada and the European powers, and three, because his Board of Peace show was pretty much a flop, with only about 23 countries signing on, only 2 of them coming from Europe.
There's been a lot of talk coming out of Mark Carney's initial speech in Davos and his trip before that to China and Qatar about some of the gains that were made over the last week for Carney's administration, but also some of the damage that may have been done over the last week, particularly when it comes to his relationship with the White House, as we've been talking about over those last 2 speeches now. Canadians are hearing different signals. We have Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick spends a lot of time with Trump. We're also hearing from U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra, who is speaking with David Common. Let's just take a moment and listen to what they had to say.
They have the second best deal in the world. And all I got to do is listen to this guy whine and complain.
I think it's great that the president and the prime minister have developed a good relationship. This would be a great topic for them to get on the phone and work through it and talk through it. We've got a lot of decisions in front of us.
Okay, so sort of 2 different takeaways from all that's happened over the last week. What's your take on how much damage has been done and where the relationship sits right now?
All right, let me put this into a wider context. First of all, on the specifics. So Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, the same guy who went to Davos and said, look, NATO relies on us, the U.S. We get to say what happens, whose comments on Europe were so provocative that there was a walkout at a dinner, a walkout that included Christine Lagarde, the head of the European Central Bank. Howard Lutnick, in an administration that has shown utmost arrogance, calling Mark Carney arrogant. This is part of the Trump temper tantrum, and it needs to be recognized as such. In terms of the practical effect, look, that trade deal, initially NAFTA, now USMCA, it is a very important trade deal, but it's the Trump folks who have threatened to walk out on it. It's not Canada threatening to walk out on it. This is an attempt to bully the Canadians. Now, Pete Hoekstra has put a different view in that speech that you heard about, which is, look, there's a way of working together. We can make a deal. But only a few days ago, Pete Hoekstra was also saying that the U.S. doesn't need Canada. So, I think the wider context that I promised you is this. This was the week that we saw, and this was a catalytic week, when not just Canada, but European countries effectively said that the old international order is not just damaged, it's gone, in large part because of what we are seeing in Washington, but also because of what we're seeing with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and because of the position of China. Mark Carney's trips to Qatar and China are part of the realignment, a realignment that European countries are also making that involves not only China and the Gulf, but it involves India, other parts of the world, including South America, which is that the economic, political, and even military relationships have to be forged without first going to the United States and saying, how are you doing there? Because you have people in the Trump administration, not all the administration, but key players, not just Donald Trump, but J.D. Vance, the vice president, Howard Lutnick, who do not see Canada and Europe as allies. They see them as either potential or actual adversaries. That's why you're getting the rhetoric out of Washington, but that's why you're getting the firm line that's been taken this week by Canada and by most of the European governments. And indeed, I think this will go farther and pick up other countries as well that are saying, we don't have to bend the knee to Washington.
Because we know that the Prime Minister's speech was not off the cuff. Neither of them were. They were very carefully crafted speeches,
Sure.
Aimed at, one would assume, accomplishing something in Davos. His speech drew a lot of attention. Maybe not the attention that he maybe wanted to get from President Trump, or perhaps it was. What's your sense of, we talked about the damage, but the specific accomplishments or what Carney was trying to get out of it?
Well, I think this works on multiple levels. One is you have a split administration. I mean, we focused on Trump and Vance and Lutnick, but there are other officials, career officials, and I think also you might rule in possibly someone like Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, who do not want to see the U.S. trashing all its alliances. So you speak back to the United States as Europe and as Mark Carney did, with the idea of, well, yeah, we want to work with you, but you've sort of walked out on this. So look, let's try to reestablish what can be done. But then the second part of that message is look, if this is not possible, we do have our own strengths. We do have our economic strengths. We have our political strengths. We have our cultural strengths, part of Carney's speech yesterday. And we will build on those strengths by cooperating with others and by working with others. And we'll put ourselves in a position where we are not dependent upon you. And that's a big ask. That's a huge ask. You have to reframe your economic, your political, your cultural policies. You have to reassert your values. And we are in the midst of that. In other words, those two speeches by Mark Carney are linked. The speech that went out to the international audience in Davos, and then the speech yesterday that went to Canadians, which is, we are Canadians from different backgrounds, we are very diverse, but we share this Canadian identity. So it's elbows up abroad, and it's elbows up at home as well.
In that speech yesterday, there was a lot about Canadian values, as you say, not a lot in terms of the plan. So I want to ask you about how Carney moves forward from this now.
Well, you're talking about perhaps what might be the most significant planning of the 21st century, and I would probably argue the most significant moment since 1991 and the end of the Cold War. We're not just talking about individual decisions on manufacturing, investment, on agriculture, on dealing with climate change. We're talking about you have to reframe your entire approach in some ways. Now, we have seen Canada do this in a way, for example, in recent years in terms of the trade deal with the European Union. But we've got Canada now in the midst of thinking about how do we reframe our relationship with China? And that's not an easy ask. And the European Union are in the same position. Canada has to think about trying to repair relations with India. Again, not an easy ask. And you have to do all of this while trying to maintain a stable economy and while trying to maintain a stable political community. So the lack of specifics at this point, and I know what Pierre Poilievre was saying yesterday, look, the lack of specifics is not because of a fundamental weakness here. It's because of the size of the task that lies ahead.
Well, there will certainly be lots to dig into as this story continues to unfold and the back and forth between the president and the prime minister continues as well. Scott Lucas, thanks very much for sharing your time with us today.